the dynamics. I remember I served in Gaborone, Bonington North. I was active. That's where I was an activist.
Okay.
I could read the mood in the constituency. I could see that he was not serving as a politician. He was just far away from the constituents, even though he had won the constituency. Remember, I stood against him in 2014.
Yes.
And he won in 2014.
That's when he won in 2014, yes.
But I could see that he was not coordinating. Me as a politician, I might not have been successful, but I learned about political activism. And I could see that he was not coordinating the constituency. He was not keeping the structures alive, and he neglected the constituents. Those were my observations. And I had no hesitation, I had no fear of standing against him because I had already read the mood in the constituency. As I'm telling you, I was already familiar with the constituency. It's a constituency that I had been coordinating.
So when you win, what did that mean for you? Because can you imagine? Ever since about 2000s early, and now you finally get, what you've been looking for. Was it everything that you thought it would be when you won? Like everything that you imagined it would be?
No, it was not everything.
Because you guys fight so hard for these seats, and then, okay, you finally get it. How did it feel?
It was not everything that I thought it would be. Sometimes you go into a situation, as a politician, if you have never been there, you tend to be very, very idealistic.
Yes.
But as I said, my political background prepared me for it.
Okay.
You see, even though there were some things which took me by surprise.
Okay. You want to name them? Like some of the things that you were not ready for?
Yes.
Yes.
Number one, I would say...
Of different identities. Podcast with PODI-CAST.
Yo, what's poppin', everybody? Welcome to another edition of the PODicast right here at Leo's Inn in Gaborone. I'm your host, SCAR, and as usual, we have another amazing guest on the show. We've always been looking forward to talking to her for personal reasons also, but because I know what she has to say, okay? It's election time, as we all know, so we're trying to get as many of the politicians that are out there in here so you can hear what they have to say, especially the ones that were on cabinet, because there's a couple of things that I think you would want to know as well. I hope I asked those questions for you. But like I said, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us. And before we go any forward, I just want to thank our sponsors. First of all, our drink sponsors, Team Agencies for the Dickings, of course. And the drink that our guest is going to be having is courtesy of alcohol liquor distributors. It's called La Cave. It's a Cabernet Sauvignon. I'll ask the guest. I'll force her somehow. Well, try to get her to have a sip. But thank you so much for joining us. And without further ado, let me welcome our guest. She is a Botswana politician who's been serving for the past, since 2019. She was with the opposition before she went over to the Botswana Democratic Party, and she started off as Minister of Nationality, Immigration and Gender Affairs. She's had other portfolios since then. Currently now, she is the Labour and Home Affairs Minister right here in BW. I'm not going to waste your time, ladies and gentlemen. Me Anna Mokghethi. Hello, ma.
Thank you so much, Scar, for having me today here at Leo's Inn.
Yes, ma'am.
On your podcast.
Yeah.
On this wonderful afternoon, warm afternoon, if I may say.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, I've already been introduced to this wine.
How does it taste?
Of it. Lovely wine, I must say.
Thank you
lovely
so much.
Red wine. Yes.
No, but we also have some ice cream. Some BW youngsters have put this together. They are called Sogo. They have different types of ice cream. You can check them out. Go Game City as well. A couple of stores there at Game City. This one is called View Sunsets. We got Gaborone Sunshine for you. So if the questioning becomes too much for you, you're allowed to pause and have some ice cream, okay?
Oh, I'd love to have some, if I may say so.
How was your day? I mean, there were launches over the weekend for a lot of candidates. How did your weekend look like?
I would say my launch went very well.
Yeah.
It is a launch that I had together with the Gaborone North candidate,
Okay.
Mr. Seema, Rabawane Seema.
Eh.
So this launch was held in Gaborone Bonington North at the Block 8 ward.
Okay.
Gaborone Bonington North, Marapa Tuta South ward.
Okay.
That is where the launch was held. We were jointly launched by His Honor, the Vice President Slamba Tsohwane. So I would say that we had a great launch, and we have achieved what we wanted to achieve.
I'm sure he's really exhausted. Like, he was starting to look like Vima and Pizzi traveling the whole country because he was everywhere, Reslamba. Like, this is a big deal. Like, these launches, they are very, very important to the candidates, I guess, like when you have one of the leaders there.
Yes, this is an important event, the launch, for every candidate. That is when you are being unveiled, officially unveiled before your constituents, that you are the official candidate for the particular area.
Awesome.
So it's just something which is very important in the political, calendar of any politician. Where you have a large crowds gathering, you have gone around your constituency, mobilizing people as much as you possibly can to make people attend. And it's sort of like a fun fair. You deliver a political message, and it's also, a lot of fun with all the music, the different artists,
the musicians and stuff.
Large crowds, attending the event. So it's something that every candidate looks forward to.
Awesome stuff. I don't know if I've seen you on any other platforms where you talk about yourself and not talk about your job. So I think this is an opportunity for us to at least try and get to know you, about where you came from, where you grew up, where you went to school. So I want to take it back to little Anna, to where you went to school and where you grew up and stuff like that. Yeah.
Little Anna. Little Anna grew up in the Kalahari Desert, in a small border village called Boxpits.
Okay.
And I must say that I had a very enjoyable childhood. I am the third child of 6 children.
Okay.
I have 2 elder brothers, and I'm the first girl, followed by 2 other girls, and our last born is a boy.
Oh, okay.
So I must say that I started my primary school in my home village, and then I proceeded to Crescent Primary School, where I finished my primary education. I was boarding school in Crescent, and then I proceeded to Maruapula school. My siblings also followed me to Maruapula, and that is where I finished my secondary school.
How do you come through from box speeds to map? I'm trying to find this road, because we always knew like map was for the cool kids in Gaborone. How did you guys end up at
I must say that those days my father was a politician.
Okay.
My father was the councillor, for the area, not even our home village. He was the councillor for the Hakibana, Middle Pits, those cluster of villages. That's where he was the area councillor. But my father was also a successful farmer. My father served in the board of directors of BMC. My father served in the board of directors of the National Development Bank. So I guess because of his interaction with the national leaders, he got to know about good schools in Botswana, and he made sure that his kids had access to good education.
That's really awesome.
So I must say that that was the good thing, that I've been able, coming from the Kalahari Desert, had access to excellent schools like that. It's been wonderful.
No doubt.
And I must say that my father, as I've said, was a politician and a farmer. He was a great inspiration to me because he was a community leader in every respect. My father served in the the Farmers Association.
Yeah.
My father served in the church as an elder.
Yeah.
And after his retirement, he went to study at Kholagano College, and then he became a pastor.
Yeah.
You know, after his retirement, he served as a counselor for 20 years. But one thing that I can tell you, what has been inspirational to me about my dad is that he was serving the community at all times.
Yeah.
He never tired to play any role, whatever role there may be, to participate in the community. He would serve, you know, as a community leader. So I would say that, you know, possibly I took that aspect from him, you know, to serve as a community leader. I never sat back. I'm always willing, you know, to participate in something.
Definitely.
Yes.
So that's
when
where the bug.
I studied as a lawyer.
Yeah.
At the University of Botswana. My first 2 years was spent at the University of Botswana, and then a further 2 years in the University of Edinburgh, and then my last year in the University of Botswana. But it was one program.
Okay.
To acquire my LLB.
Oh, okay.
So even though I may have served it in different parts, but ultimately it was one LLB program.
Awesome.
So after I acquired my LLB, I joined government as a trainee lawyer, and I realized that somehow I don't think that is for me. So I joined private practice.
I want to get into that though. Was law always something that you wanted to do? Or did you have any other aspirations? Because like you say, your dad was a community builder and he
Yes.
was into politics and he was doing all of these other things. Was that, you know, your pathway to what he's doing, or did you just want to just do your own thing?
It wasn't necessarily my pathway.
Yeah.
You know, when growing up, because we had a general dealer as well,
Yeah.
shop, and my dad, you know, always said, this is what you should do, you know, as a leader, as a manager. You must always, you know, take responsibility.
Yeah.
You must always do this. So when the stock came for the shop, my father would make sure that we wake up, even if the truck arrives at 4 a.m.,
Yeah.
we have to be there with the invoice to ensure that, you know, all the stock, you know, the stock that has been bought, you know, that is in the invoice is there.
Yeah.
So then I said, I want to be a manager. Manager in what? I don't know.
But something with management.
But, you know,
Yeah.
yes, something in management. So, you know, that's how my dad, you know, inspired us to take up positions of responsibility. Always take responsibility. And he was always a hard worker. My father woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning, you know. He had his cup of tea early in the morning, and those days was when you would make fire in the coal-fired stove. That is where you'd wake up early in the morning, start making, you know, tea, boiling water to make coffee and tea early in the morning. So
Because I'm trying to imagine also, like, that lifestyle and coming to Gaborone and going to MAP, how was that transition for you as being someone who grew up in that part of the world and then coming to this side?
Yeah. And it was interesting in the sense that we went to school with leading children from families who were leading families in Botswana,
Yeah.
who were also in farming.
Okay.
So you'll find that we were naturally drawn to as friends, you
Yeah.
know, to children who are from those families.
Awesome.
I don't know how it happened, but it also happened naturally.
Because, like, you'd think, because, like, a lot of the kids who grow up outside of Gaborone are not as confident and as, I guess, forefront and put themselves out there as much as the ones that we usually see, especially
Yes.
from the private school institutions in Gaborone. So it's quite refreshing to hear, like, everyone was trying to make each other feel comfortable in those spaces
We
back
were
then.
from the rural areas.
Yeah.
Most of the people that I went to school with,
Yeah.
you know, whether it's Crescent, whether it's from in Marapulo, wherever,
Yeah.
we were from the rural areas and we were from, you know, farming background.
Yeah.
So I don't know, somehow we found each other there.
Yeah.
And we found it to be a a welcoming environment. You didn't feel out of place. So I must say, you know, that was the interesting aspect of it.
I want to ask also about your mom at this point, you know. Your dad is this go-getter. What is your mom into at this point? Like, what are some of the lessons that you picked up from her?
I'm so happy that you asked me about my mom.
Um,
I'm so happy because she has always been playing a supportive role.
Yeah.
As I said, my dad was involved in so many things. He was that person, you know, who was the farmer, He was a councillor. He was serving in this board of directors that I've mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But she would always remain behind and take care of the, the businesses, because we didn't only have one shop and, one business.
Yeah.
And the farm. My mother took care of those businesses. She always remained behind and took care of buying the stock, going to the farm to ensure the rations for the farm workers were there and they are paid off. And my mother literally knew everything about everything,
Yeah.
She was that kind of woman. But later on, I realized that my mother had a great dependency on my dad.
Yeah.
My dad played, the leadership role, in the family.
Yeah.
Whether it's, in our spiritual, playing a spiritual leadership role in the home, to ensure that he brings us up spiritually.
Yeah.
But my mother was always there just to support that and not to hinder that,
Yeah.
So I'm glad that you asked me about my mom, because she, if it were not for her supportive role, that she played, my father would not have achieved what he managed to achieve, because he was assured of the supportive role, of the woman that he had left behind.
I think we always forget that. We always forget that, like, some level of stability comes from the fact that, the moms is at the house and handling business like that. It's so hot today. I don't know how you're handling it. I am burning. Whoa. But like, we have to keep it going. So don't be shocked, guys. Then when I can say something to wipe myself with. Actually.
So if I may say that my mom was not really a housewife kind of woman. Because she was always, there working. She was the first woman in our area to have a driver's license and to be able to drive.
Yeah. No, I love that, because
she was very independent.
The ladies in the house are always the most unsung heroes in any conversation. And like, because also I'm privy to, like, I was very close with Sasa, and like the level of strength that she has also, which comes from having a strong mother. I automatically thought that means your mom was also like a strong-willed woman as well.
Yes.
So it was for personal reasons for me asking that question. I'm going to move forward though into you being at school and you ultimately getting into law. You say you went into government and then you realized that this is not for you.
Yes.
You want to do your private practice. What year is this, and how easy is it to start a private practice?
I graduated in 1988
Okay.
at the University of Botswana.
Yeah.
Then I went to the Gaborone Magistrates, Magistrates Court, to serve as a trainee magistrate.
Oh.
But then I realized I don't think I can sentence anybody to a term of imprisonment. I think the decision is too difficult for me. And I felt that in a month or so, I'm supposed to be sitting on the bench, handing out sentences to people. I didn't feel confident enough to do that.
They wanted to do it that early though. Like,
yes.
You don't know, there wasn't enough magistrates? What was it? Like, how are you thrown into a magistrate seat at that time?
Those days, jobs were so accessible. You will not believe that today there are so many of Batswana students who finish at school and then they don't have jobs readily available.
Yeah.
But during our time, the job was always readily available for you, whether it's in the magistrates, if you have been legally trained, whether it's the magistrates court, whether it's at Attorney General Chamber or wherever, in some government department. There's always a job waiting for you. So that is the good thing, about the time when we graduated.
But can you imagine living now, though? Like, can you imagine the trouble that we have right now and how frustrating it is, though?
Yes.
Right now, I think the pressure also from the parents also, because I think some parents just don't understand why kids are not getting jobs that easy, because back in the day, I think it was way easier then. So it's a bit difficult now to be able to, like, get any type of employment. So guys should stop being so hard on us. It's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And
It's
the
really,
reason
really hard.
why it's hard is because those traditional jobs or let me say professions that we were trained in, they are saturated. There are no longer jobs, in the formal market.
Yeah.
If you see, there are no longer jobs in the corporate sector. Yeah. That is the reality. So that is why now we are talking about new jobs, and jobs in IT.
Yeah.
Those are the new jobs that we should be looking for.
Definitely.
What are the jobs? Because we are talking about manufacturing. We are talking about a private sector export-led economy.
Yeah.
So that means we should be producing goods for export.
Yeah.
And we can only do that through the value chain development. And for now, I can say the market is completely different, the job market. The education institutions have to also adapt. They have to adapt to ensure that they do curriculum development. They have to do market research, to establish what is it that the market is demanding, and then develop their curriculum accordingly. Even HRDC, it's its responsibility to ensure where are the skills gaps. And not only that, for HRDC to ensure in terms of finding out where are the skills gaps and advising the education institutions, as to what kind of education they should provide. But employers should also think around the issue of retooling, upskilling their employees. They should also take that responsibility to ensure that their staff, can meet up, to the expectations, of the job market. What is that very company is demanding? Do you spew me out because my experience, my skills, or whatever are no longer relevant, or do you upskill me, or do you retool me, so that I can better deliver on, the jobs that are available in the company?
I'm going to ask about since we're already here, ask about the age of retirement. They're always talking about that being another thing that's, needs to be discussed. Okay, there won't be room for other kids to get in because Batswana is about 65. How about it gets reduced to about 55?
In my view, they're backing up the wrong tree. They're backing up the wrong tree because people like that have got immense job experience, which is what the employers are looking for. You see? So the upcoming, generation, they must look for new jobs. Where are the new jobs? Where are the new jobs? They must find out. You see? They must find out. It's not only about new jobs and so on. It's about getting feedback from the employers. What is the feedback from employers? What are they saying about fresh graduates?
No, but 5 years experience, and that's always been what the problem is.
That's like Ikarabe. What are the employers? Because as the Minister of Employment, we are getting feedback from employers. They are saying that even though a graduate might have graduated with a certain qualification, they are not necessarily job ready.
I believe
attributes? The question is, what attributes is it that the employer is looking for? They are giving feedback that fresh graduates lack certain soft skills. You see?
Like what?
Soft skills. You don't know how to prepare CVs. They don't know how to prepare cover letters. They are not groomed in personal behavior. They are not groomed in terms of being productive, having the right level of productivity. Those are the things that they are complaining about. They are complaining about behavioral issues.
I had so that we were still on the same page. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who went to an international university, and he says that as he's a property manager and he's into so even at school they were even taught how to eat properly, like how will break. You go to the refectionary, you actually still have your shirt on, in a way where you can communicate. Like, it's a way where because this culture, he says, ultimately trickles in to the workspace, where instead of you sitting inside the office with like some of your other co-workers going over work and whatever, we have this thing where we disengage and we are only soft skills, communicator, to be more productive.
We are talking about emotional intelligence. Those are the kind of skills that employers are looking for. For example, right now we are, in my ministry, in partnership with other institutions, UN agencies, the the American Embassy and some NGOs. We are doing employability training.
Okay.
And we are doing that all over the country. Yeah. We are not only situated in Gaborone. It's in Gaborone, it's in Khanzi, it's in Francistown, it's in Kang, it's in Moshopa, it's in Molepolole, it's in Kanye. Yeah. Just to give an example of those a few villages or places where the employability has taken place. So one of the things also that we have to mind as job seekers, to mind what you are writing on your Facebook page. Because employers these days are looking for what you write on your social media platforms reveals your character.
So it is
true.
So
they also do go into those, to those things. So it's just about training you in proper behavior. We've got a serious problem of low productivity, work ethic.
Yeah.
You know that we will go as far as training kids or graduates. Start with making up your bed. Teach your children to make up their bed in the morning, clean their room, help, and to teach adults, parents, to teach their children and groom them to do household chores. Because that is where productivity training starts. Teach your child how to make up their bed. Teach them how to do their own washing. Teach them how to cook, to clean. Just things like that. Those are the kind of things that, groom a child to be productive in their personal behavior. When you go to the workplace, go motlhofo gore o bereke, o romege. Go romega ke so ga se so se motlhofo. Bana ba bangwe ha ile gore ga ba tlwaela go runga mo lapeng. Ba go tswela ka boitsholo jo bontseng jalo le mo tirong. O tshwantse gore nne motho o matlhagatlhaga o berekang ka natla ka dinako tsotlhe. If you get what I'm trying to say. So that is what employability training is also about.
I think because I think that's what's been missing on employability. I never looked at it that way. Or, a lot of people think, okay, I've passed tests, I've got distinctions, and my GPA is 4.0. Then it should be easy. But then some of the soft skills, communicating, respectfulness, being able to run proactive. But I think that's the thing. How then do we make that connection between your tertiary, then they're ready? Are we saying that they're not ready, so now we have to get another stage going? Because right now, they just don't know what to do. They just passed exams.
Yes. Even I've once spoken to a university lecturer who said to me that they find it, according to them in their assessment, it's necessary perhaps to take kids to, give them like a gap year of additional training between, their Form 5 and entry into university. Because some lecturers feel that these kids are just not even ready.
They're kids.
To go into first year in the university, you see. So, these are the things that, that we really need to look into. So once they've finished this employability training, the feedback is that, or the assessment is that those people who graduate from that training are now 60% more employable.
No, but we want it to work. We want these things to work. We want to see people, because there's a lot of depression that's going around because people are just seeing that age is just and the private sector there's not much to speak about there, because I think a lot of us grow up thinking that the ultimate employability because permanent and pensionable, you want some security in your life. So I don't know, as a ministry, what conversations are you having with the private sector about also taking up some of these young people, and are there any incentives for them?
For example, right now, we've got the National Employment Program, isn't it? National Attachment Service, whereby we attach, as a ministry, we attach graduates to different government departments. Currently, the private sector was involved initially until we discovered that the private sector was exploiting, our kids. But
A lot.
so they go through training, they get attached to a certain job where they are given job experience. They go through work experience, on the job experience, so that, when they go out there into the job market, then they can be more employable. But our endearing hope is also that the employers would take them on. Now, after realizing that our youngsters and our graduates are being exploited, we decided to stop. But now we have started again. We now have the new program, the new revised program, whereby because the private sector has been calling us again, to provide them with internship students, the national internship program students, so that they can also be attached. But we ensure this time that they are attached to reputable companies. And we also attach them to international organizations, no longer just, based in Botswana, but the rest of the world, so that they can get job experience, not only inside the country, but internationally.
Awesome stuff.
So that is, those are some of the improvements that we have done. There's a lot of issues of exploitation, was unearthed.
Yeah.
So we have dealt with that and, said it's not good for kids to be exploited. For example, if they are attached to a certain department, those people, the officers who are working there, will go on a job or whatever task after hours, and they'll get after hour allowances. But which will, the interns will not be getting that allowance. So these are the things that we are improving on, to ensure that our kids are not exploited, while we are saying we are empowering them, to get on the job training.
Awesome stuff. I want to talk a little bit about your employment history as well, because you didn't want to become a magistrate, so you decided to open up your own practice. How easy was it to open up your practice back then, and did you manage to get any success? Because I'm imagining these things are fairly new at the time for people, even a female-led, a law firm.
Those days it was easier when I started practicing, because I started working as a professional assistant with one of the local law firms. I worked there for about 2 years, and then I ventured out on my own. But it was easier those days, to open a private law firm.
Was the community?
There was a service. Legal services were in demand. They were really, really in demand.
Awesome stuff.
But as time went on, I found it less and less rewarding.
Okay.
Because of more and more law firms opening up, and we are all general legal practitioners. That is where the difficulty for me came in.
There was no specializing.
And I think law firms who can, go into a niche area, it could be more beneficial to them in terms of, how the particular service that they are, providing.
Okay.
Otherwise, to continue to be a general legal practitioner was becoming increasingly difficult because you became a price taker. Then there were issues. Of going into boards. I don't know what they call it, but you had to be on a certain list. If you are not on that list, then you will not get jobs.
Who put up this list?
Many institutions, these financial institutions, government institutions, banks, they opened up these, they are the ones who started with that.
So how long you are not on this? Is it
a
what?
great deal of people who were your clients, no longer are saying, Mokghethi, I want you to do this job for me as my attorney. Then he said, but I'm not on that list of preferred attorneys. So then you have to part with your client, because even though, for example, if you are going to do conveyancing, your client wants you to do their conveyancing work. But the institution from where they are lending money,
Once
or they are borrowing money, is restricting that to their list of attorneys.
No, but you got to tell us who these people were and
So
why
then
they would do
that became a serious problem.
Jeez.
Yes.
Because they have a list of their own. So this means you end up losing clients as well.
You as the customer, you have to go with what that financial institution's preference is.
Is that how you decided to get into law? Like what made you get into politics?
No,
you
it's
wanted
not
to
what
change
made
the
me
rules.
necessarily go into politics.
Yeah.
Remember, I went into politics in 1997.
Yeah. So
I went into politics in 1997. I joined BNF. It was a disaster. I wasn't even in that party for a very long time.
Yeah.
I was immediately elected into the Central Committee to the position portfolio of Secretary for Nationalities. And within no time, there were misunderstandings and disagreements, which resulted in the formation of the Botswana Congress Party. I was one of the people who were the formers, who formed the Botswana Congress Party.
Definitely.
Yes. So I was in various positions of leadership in the Central Committee. I was in the Central Committee when immediately after its formation. I served as the president for the Women's League. I served as the secretary for legal affairs.
Yeah.
And, so I've always been in positions of responsibility, and leadership responsibility in these political parties.
No doubt.
Yes, so...
Because I'm trying to figure out, Honor, okay, you went from BNF and then you one of the founders of the BCP. Like, how then do you end up getting out of the BCP and then going to the BDP? There's so much for us to speak about and we don't have a lot of time. How did you come to that decision, or opposition politics to the incumbent?
Yeah, there were issues which created dissatisfaction. It's not necessarily that I wanted to join BDP. I wanted to join BDP, but not necessarily to take up a leadership role, not necessarily to be serve as a member of parliament.
Yeah.
In BCP, I've served since 1999. I was standing for elections since 1999.
Yeah.
And then 2004, and then 2009,
Jeez.
and then 2014.
Yeah.
I stood for elections all these years. You see? Then when I joined the Botswana Democratic Party, it's not that I wanted to join I just wanted to join to be a member of the party. But very soon, within no time, they were asking me, can you take up this position?
There's something here written. It's a quote that's been given to Redumela Salashando. Me Anna informed me. This is in quotes. Informed me about a month before. This is an article from the Guardian and the Midweek Sun. Me Anna Mokghethi informed me. Anna informed me about a month before resigning that she had decided to terminate her membership for two reasons. The first was that her law firm was not performing well and she wanted to apply for a job possibly in one of the parastatals, and BCP membership would be a problem for her job search. The second reason she advanced was that she's now married to a BDP member. Close quote. So is any of this true?
Yeah. He deliberately decided, to make that statement. To say that my practice was no longer doing well. That's why I said to you, I did not necessarily want to serve in any position.
Yeah.
I said to him, I want to focus on my practice.
Yeah.
That is what I said to him. Then he said, but if you leave the party, it's not going to, it's not going to look good on the party, on the BCP.
Yeah.
That is what I said to him, but he said to me. So he went and twisted my words around at that time. But as I said, there were things that were not making me happy, and why I wanted to stand back, from the BCP, that were not making me happy. Number one is the way things were shifted. Shifted from saying we are indeed a party e leng gore ga ena monga yone. We want to be a democratic party in the real sense of the word. I was the Secretary for Legal Affairs, and I could see the shenanigans that were going on while I was in control of, putting together, the amendments in the Constitution. Because some of the amendments which were being made, you see. So a lot of things, I really opened my eyes then, what agenda as to what agenda was being pushed here. Slowly, you could see that things were shifting from how the idealistic positions that we had taken from the time of its formation to the reality. Within no time, you could see that there was a certain group of people who were now taking over the party. Either they are lecturers at the university or it's their friends with whom they are living with at Pakaline. Even if you look at them now, if you look at that leadership now, university, that is the truth of the matter. Even now, Nakare, they are playing musical chairs. That was the reality that I saw.
So there was no movement of the ideas that made you fall in love with the movement in the first place.
Yes.
So how does BDP come to someone and say, come this side? Like, how does the conversation go?
The conversation started with, can you stand as a member of parliament? Can you stand for us in Gaborone, Bonington North? I'm now It's not that I joined BDP 2016. Willingly. I'm just joining it. You see? Then they approached me in the branch committee members and said, can you come and stand for us?
I want to understand, because this is why I don't think I could ever be a politician, because it gets really, really messy on the relationships that you have in your life if you have different political ideas with the people that are on the opposing floor. I'm thinking, because you have been you've worked with Dumela Salashando, you've worked with Dumaboko, how easy was it for you to take that decision to stand in a place where I guess Red Dumaboko is going to stand? Does that count in your calculations of whether to or whether not to?
I was an experienced politician, if you recall. I was a very experienced politician.
I think that's what we forget, Scott, because you've been there for a long time, so you know this thing.
I know the dynamics. I remember I served in Gaborone, Bonington North. I was active. That's where I was an activist.
Okay.
I could read the mood in the constituency. I could see that he was not serving as a politician. He was just far away from the constituents, even though he had won the constituency. Remember, I stood against him in 2014.
Yes.
And he won in 2014.
That's when he won in 2014, yes.
But I could see that he was not coordinating. Me as a politician, I might not have been successful, but I learned about political activism. And I could see that he was not coordinating the constituency. He was not keeping the structures alive, and he neglected the constituents. Those were my observations. And I had no hesitation, I had no fear of standing against him, because I had already read the mood in the constituency. As I'm telling you, I was already familiar with the constituency. It's a constituency that I had been coordinating.
So when you win, what did that mean for you? Because can you imagine? Ever since about 2000s early, and now you finally get, what you've been looking for. Was it everything that you thought it would be when you won? Everything that you imagined it would be?
No, it was not everything.
Because you guys fight so hard for these seats, and then, okay, you finally get it. How did it feel?
It was not everything that I thought it would be. Sometimes you go into a situation, as a politician, if you have never been there, you tend to be very, very idealistic.
Yes.
But as I said, my political background prepared me for it.
Okay.
You see, even though there were some things which took me by surprise.
Okay. You want to name them? Some of the things that you were not ready for?
Yes.
Yes.
Number one, I would say the expectations You are thinking you have to serve at the policy level, at a certain level. And how is it that you can work? But people expect more from you in terms of interacting with them, at constituency level.
Yeah.
You see? You cannot be a straight-laced person. There are things that you have to go the extra mile to do them.
Yeah.
You see? You have to really go the extra mile. Number one is building relationships. That is the most important thing. So 2019, one of the things that I had promised my constituents is to constantly be engaging with different types of people, of different groupings. The elderly. I made sure that I engaged with the elderly people in the different wards, and I used giving blankets and hampers as a mode of bringing them together, but at the same time spreading a political message. Then I got involved with people with disability, helping with people with disability, identifying where they are. There was a group called Mothers with Challenges, that I met. They're mostly mothers who had children with cerebral, palsy, and helped these, people. Then you had adults. You had adult people who now suffered from incontinence for various reasons, to help them with diapers. I helped people who needed wheelchairs, to secure wheelchairs, because I'm that kind of a person, to be a compassionate person, to realize where is there a need, and meeting, that need. Then there was the youth. How do I engage with the youth? The first thing that I did was to ensure that because I had 6 wards, I got 10 youth from each ward, so there are 60 youths, and I collaborated with Leah to train them at Glen Valley, to do, what you call urban farming, because I realized that in the urban development plan there is something called urban agriculture, to get them involved in urban agriculture. So unfortunately what happened is that once they had been trained, we could not be allocated land because we were earmarking open spaces.
Oh, okay.
And we were dependent on the Gaborone City Council to give us those open spaces. Unfortunately, we were not granted that wish. So some of those who were more productive and more innovative, they went to look for farmland in and around Gaborone, or let me just say around Gaborone areas, and did farming. They did horticulture farming, and they made a living out of it.
They learned something that they can actually use for themselves.
So that was my way of empowering our youth, through urban agriculture. But they were trained. They are now trained at Glen Valley. It was up to them, to see what is it that they are doing with the training that they had received.
Awesome.
Now, in addition, to that, I had the youth engagements. The youth engagement through sports. I had several tertiary institutions in my constituency, 5 of them, in fact. There's GUC, Baisago, then it was Lincoln, ABM, and let me think, which was the other one? There was the 5th one. ABM is the 4th, and there was the 5th one. That I also brought together to do a tournament for them, a football tournament, volleyball tournament, and a netball tournament. So this was a way of building relationships, with the children from the tertiary institutions. I also built relationships with football clubs, whereby I regularly engaged with them. Did tournaments for them. Ensured that I gave them football kits, balls, nets, and other equipment like whistles and flags, you name it. So this is my way of fulfilling my promise to engage with many, many different groups in my constituency.
I love to hear it. I want to talk also because, usually when you're given a portfolio in cabinet, sometimes apparently it's very, very difficult. So I've seen you do the balancing act better. I don't know if it's because it's in Gaborone or you're closer. Maybe people think it's a cheat code because they have Komara and Kwana. But like, you've been lucky enough to be close to like some of your constituents because we're in Gaborone. As Minister of Nationality, Immigration and Gender Affairs then, how easy was it to be able to do both? To cater to your community, but also such and I don't know if it was the second term. You're the second minister ever to run this portfolio after Mayor Dorcas Mokghethi. So it was fairly new. You're in Nationality, Immigration and Gender Affairs. How easy was it for you to balance the two? What's going on in your community and to run a ministry?
Let me be honest with you. It was not easy. You see, the gender portfolio kept me very busy because we had immediately after we formed a government, within 5 months, we must remember that we had COVID.
Yeah.
So things were not as easy as all that. We said we had another pandemic. Apart from the COVID-19 pandemic, now there's another pandemic which is coming about because of COVID, which was gender-based violence.
Yes, ma'am.
People will say that what we are seeing now is unprecedented.
Yes.
The level of gender-based violence just rose to another level. But it was not only, that shadow pandemic in Botswana. It was all over the world, where the levels of GBV just went up, where you saw, because people are being locked down, under this closed environment, people perhaps had a let out where they were able to go, they had freedom to go to different places.
Yeah.
But now you are locked up in one place with an abusive person. And we saw it was terrible. It was something which was very, very, very heart-rending. So that portfolio kept me very busy.
I want
to
talk particularly about your gender-based violence because there was an exchange between you and the minister, well, not minister, the then MP for Mahalape, Rayandani Boko. Yeah, yes. Where he was talking like, he was asking about, he had a motion, an urgent motion that he tabled asking the president to set up a commission of inquiry on gender-based violence, rape and other sexual offenses. And, you famously said it was not urgent and you got under a lot of fire for that. So yes. I don't know if you want to talk to that. You don't think it's urgent to set up?
There's a difference between reality and what you are misquoted to have said. I oppose that motion. It was brought on urgency. And I said I'm opposed to the urgency. It's not an urgent motion. It was construed to be me saying gender-based violence is not urgent. Now you must remember that we already had a blueprint of how we are going to be dealing with gender-based violence. It was already there. The book was there, which had been sponsored by UN agency and other agencies, There
was a blueprint of how to approach this matter.
Deal to fight this gender-based, violence. It was a multi-pronged, multi-strategy, approach towards ending gender-based violence.
Yes, ma'am.
It was the strategy, it was called the Strategy Towards Ending Gender-Based Violence in Botswana. That was the heading of that research material.
Yes, ma'am.
And it was a well-researched document. And I didn't believe that you can end gender-based violence with a motion, an urgent motion, to set up a commission of inquiry when so much research work had been done.
Yeah.
And there was already a strategy in place in terms of ending gender-based violence.
The recommendations and stuff.
So how it turned out, and let me just say the Hansard is there, to back me up in terms of, what did I say? Did I say the motion is not urgent?
Yeah.
Or did I say gender-based violence is not urgent?
But on the other breath, someone can say, or don't we need one? And why didn't we ever get a commission of inquiry, especially in places like Bonobomulepolole and like these places like Bo Rapale Tlhakane, where we have these particular places where we see the worst kind of gender-based violence, and also, defilement that happens a lot in. There are places that have been identified as trouble areas in the country.
Absolutely correct.
So I'm thinking, if it's not urgent, can't we have one commission of inquiry?
That is why we held, whenever we had International Women's Day, when we had how many days?
16.
The 15 days.
16 days of activism.
16 days of activism towards ending gender-based violence.
Yes, ma'am.
During those days, we chose precisely those places that you are mentioning, the hotspots where gender-based violence is more prevalent.
Yes, ma'am.
Where we are going to be having the event. We chose those places so that we can, it's part of the advocacy work that we are doing towards ending gender-based violence. That's why we chose the places where gender-based violence was more prevalent.
Definitely.
So those are the things, as I was saying, that kept me very busy, during that period. And I must say that I got the reward. I got the D'Souza Award, award. I got the D'Souza Award where D'Souza was, scanning African countries and to choose a minister, either a gender minister or a first lady that they can give this award to.
Yes, ma'am.
And surprise, surprise, I was the one that was given this award.
Definitely. No, I really appreciate it because, like I said, it's a fairly new ministry, which now I guess the portfolio has gone over to the Ministry of Youth now. And how does that stuff work? Like, how do people dismantle ministries and then a portfolio that you were holding now suddenly goes somewhere else? I don't know if you know how that works, because sometimes it just feels like, whatever work you've been putting in, now it's going to stop, and now someone else has to, and this is now a ministry that has sports under it and has culture, musicians. Who's going to now focus on the other stuff? So I don't know. And how do you feel about it? Well, it
shouldn't be something which is personalized. I am personally very passionate about the issue of gender, advocacy, issues of empowering women and the girl child.
Yes, ma'am.
Even before I became a minister, those are the issues that I've always been passionate about. But when we were doing the realignment of ministries, then we had to put together, portfolios which go, youth. It's natural. It's a natural thing for you to group issues like youth and gender under one ministry. So I wouldn't want to personalize it and say, let me stay with it because I'm passionate about it, There are so many ministries where realignment was done, where the ministries there was a realignment of ministries, there was a realignment of state-owned enterprises. So it was just a general exercise, if I may say so. But personally, I must say that my heart was really broken that I had to be parted with the gender portfolio.
No, I totally feel that because, like I said, it must have become very, very close to you because you were doing so much. And I think a lot of ladies felt a certain level of security because there's a woman at the head of it also. Yeah. So they felt, as someone who will be. But I'm not saying discrediting or anyone else who's going to hold on to that post. It's just.
But you will not believe that even when I left that portfolio, people still felt that they should invite me to their event. They just felt that, let us continue holding on to Mokghethi, let us invite her. But I sometimes I honored the invitation because I realized that they wanted me. But then I had to slowly, sever myself because my ministry is a very, very big ministry.
Yeah.
The current portfolio, with so many different 7 departments.
Yeah.
It's not a joke. It's a very, very, very big ministry. In fact, it's much more than the departments when it was just Ministry of Nationality, Immigration and Gender Affairs.
No doubt. I'm going to talk about some more controversy that's online because, like I said, we don't have a lot of time. You're out here doing a lot of work, so I'm just going to jump through all of the things that I have on the show prep. And this is regarding a case that was heard at the Court of Appeal regarding you and your law firm, where there was a legal battle with a certain family regarding the execution of their estate. And it's something that I've always been interested in because you see a lot of these cases a lot of the time on newspapers. And, you start worrying. All right, cool. So what they're saying is that they accuse you of not complying with orders directing that you give full account of the estate. This was, put together by the late gentleman's granddaughter, who is challenging the legality of Joseph's will, that, she feels what she was left out in the cold. And this became, you were all over the newspapers for this one. I don't think I've ever seen you respond to it. So I'd just like to give you this opportunity right now. What happened here? Because it got back in front of the courts.
Oh, thank you. Let me thank you for asking.
Yes, ma'am.
And being forthright enough to ask.
Yes, ma'am.
It's not something I've realized that no matter how I try to correct it, there's continuing of fueling of misinformation.
Yes, ma'am.
It's surprising that this came into the limelight, or came to be reported on when I became minister. Let me tell you that the deceased died in 2012.
Oh, my word.
That legal battle started in 2013, and it has never been reported on before. Somehow, my becoming a minister changed the dynamics. There are some people who told themselves that they are going to fight me in the court of public opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
So, as I'm saying, it was a Boswa, of which I was the center of, having been appointed as the executor of the estate.
Yes, ma'am.
And, defending the case,
Yes.
as the executor. Because that was my role and my duty and responsibility as an executor to defend the will of the deceased.
What they wanted
So
to happen.
somehow the people felt that there must be sympathy because somebody had been excluded. Some people had been excluded from the will. Remember that there's something called freedom of testation. I'm a lawyer. I write what the person writes,
Yes,
instructs me to write. If you want scar, well, scar, yana. If you say, these are my wishes, my last wishes regarding my property, a lawyer wa say we're not the batla. So, as I said, it was a long dispute which had been instituted 2013. 2018, another case was lodged for me to account because I'd been in charge of the estate. Those who were asking for nice weather,
Summer is
changing,
back.
It's becoming cool.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so those who wanted to be declared as beneficiaries under the estate said I must account, for the estate. And I defended the case on the basis that you are not yet a beneficiary, so I cannot account to you. So the court disagreed with me. And I appealed to the Court of Appeal, and the Court of Appeal still disagreed with me. And I had to then comply with the court order to then provide the accounting. And the Court of Appeal gave me a 30 days extension of time from the date provided by the court, by the High Court, to comply with that order. Then, meantime, those people instituted a case. They had instituted a case saying I must be imprisoned for not complying with the court order. And I disagreed because the Court of Appeal had already given me extension of time.
So this was.
So I thought it was
you
absolutely ridiculous. You are still pursuing something, You are saying I didn't comply with the court order. Meantime, the Court of Appeal gave me an opportunity to comply. Extended the time for compliance. I did comply. I complied all the things that they were saying, warranting them to make the application. Some of them were false accusations. But meantime, they were feeding the very people who were bringing those applications against me. They were feeding the newspapers with whatever information, their side of the story, how they wanted me to be perceived. If I have never committed a criminal offense, I have never had a criminal case being opened against me.
Yes, ma'am.
So it was all distortion. I don't want to use mahukumangwe. I'll just say to you, when
no, PG-18.
You have read the papers, they said I won big time. All those applications which are brought against me, I won big time.
Then why don't you sue? Not sue, but like that's just me.
Yeah,
it's like because
there's still a pending case before court.
Yeah.
There's still a pen on which I'm suing one of those papers.
Yeah, because there was a lot.
I thought Kanye Hedile, then they started a new dimension.
Yeah.
There was one particular newspaper outlet. We started a new dimension. After so then it was now turned to, I forged the will, but it was none of the allegations. Since 2013, it was not the allegation. Then they decided to bring a new dimension. So that is the newspaper that I've sued. And the case is still pending, and we are hoping to go to trial very soon. We have been given a date, and we are going to trial.
Yeah, no. But as someone who's, represented people in the legal system and someone who's been at the mercy of the legal system in Botswana, what would you say about it? Is this a place where things work?
What would I say about?
About the legal system in Botswana, because, we have people who complain sometimes because maybe it was hard on them, maybe, and they were facing molao, they were on the wrong side of it. But as someone who has practiced it and also has had to answer cases
what I can say is that leaders can be abused. And I'm a typical example of somebody who was abused because of being a minister.
Yeah.
As I said, that case had long been before the courts, and nobody reported on it.
Yeah.
Nobody said anything that this and happening because you are a minister.
Yeah.
Now the dynamics changed because I was a minister. So I felt I was being abused because I'm a minister.
Just so I wrap up all of these bad stories, I want to talk a little bit about Sarona. We just took over some flowers and stuff to her this year with a couple of her friends, and I don't know if you've ever been on any interviews to talk about her ever since what happened. There is another court case. I don't know what type of case this is that's appeared, and people are, I guess there's an investigation about what exactly happened on the evening when she did pass away. And I don't know how close you are to this particular case and who put this together, and this is who against who. Why are all of these things popping up on newspapers, and who's investigating what?
Well, there was a commission of inquiry which had been instituted.
Okay.
To establish the cause of the accident.
Yes.
Unfortunately for me, I have not yet received the final report. There was the police report, sorry, not the police report, but the CAB, the CAB report. Then there was the commission of inquiry.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have not yet seen the outcome of the commission of inquiry.
So you are not the one pursuing these things. It's just Molao.
It was the state.
The state is trying to find out what happened.
State, yes, which was pursuing that investigation, the commission of inquiry.
How are you doing, though?
Well, it was difficult. It continued to be difficult. But as the Bible says, God heals the brokenhearted. Yeah. And I would say, if you believe in that, if you believe that God heals the brokenhearted, you will indeed, heart will indeed be broken. There are times when, emotional, pain comes, but then it's something that, it's fleeting, it's a fleeting moment.
Yes,
because at the end of the day, you have to live your life, as somebody, yes, but I can just, in brief say that was the most difficult period of my life.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, you're strong.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
now
I know. Ma. Korela, I just wanted to
you
give-
grew up in the neighborhood.
Yes, ma'am.
Sasa. You were in the music industry together.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. You
No,
were in the
Mas.
music industry together.
Yes, ma'am.
You know. So, it was a great loss,
Yeah,
know,
ma'am.
and very, sometimes losing someone in such an unexpected manner is very different from Motohalwetse. And somehow you expect you can accept, but when it happens so suddenly,
Yes, ma'am.
it becomes more difficult and more painful.
To even take. Yeah, that's why I'm not going to stay on this conversation longer because I really don't like talking about it. I want to talk about your leader. How do you think he has fared in these past 5 years, Masisi, if you were to give him a grade?
How have I fared?
How do you think he has fared in his job as the president of BW? How do you think he has done in his role as the president? If you were to give him a grade, like hypothetically, Hela, if you were to give him
His Excellency, the President.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for asking me that question. Thank you
How's it
for
sounding?
asking me that question.
Yes, ma'am.
I have never been so inspired by a leader.
Yes, ma'am. Are you safe? Is it cool? All right.
I have never been so inspired by a leader the way I have been inspired by His Excellency, the President.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm talking about Dr. Masisi.
Yeah.
He was a person who was voted for on a high note with high hope, of bringing change in Botswana. And indeed, he had the vision to do that in terms of the 2019 manifesto. But then fate handed him, a bad deck of cards in the form of COVID. But even during the most difficult times, he rose to the challenge. The real test of leadership doesn't come when things are easy. The real test of leadership comes during difficult times. And he faced a difficult time. Because now he had to steer this ship, the ship of governance, through that unexpected difficult time. That is when now you look at him and you say, this man has gone through trials and tribulations. But then you also look at his strength of character and leadership ability. Because I was in the committee, the presidential task force team. Where he was where that team, was making the decisions to steer us out of COVID. And that is now because he was the one who was heading as the president, as the name suggests, the presidential task force team. It was difficult because there's no income.
For those who don't know, though, can you describe what the task force was really doing? Because maybe in my head, I'm thinking it was meetings after meetings. You guys sit and then you decide, okay, team, everyone goes to their designated
Remember that
departments.
he had to make the most difficult decision, which was to declare a state of emergency. Now that
everyone was angry at that, and they were saying,
that
there's
was
no need for it.
unprecedented, apart from the smaller Mokghethi, where he declared, Mokghethi declared a state of emergency to extend the period of preparing the voters' rolls. Remember? This one was a real state of emergency.
I was probably really small. And
remember that we had, in February, we had just decided on the budget. The 2020-2021 budget. And that budget had to be set aside. And now we had to face an emergency. One of the words that I loved most, which were used by Eric Mulale in one of our meetings, and I will never forget that meeting. He said, we are building a ship while sailing. Because how do you run a government? You run a government according to plans. Or you make plans of how you are going to spend this money for this ministry, that ministry. All the budgets have been allocated. And then now you are faced with an emergency. And you have to take that, put that aside and start now spending the money to save the lives of people. So I'm telling you, that was the first test of his leadership.
Yes.
Remember, he dismissed the permanent secretary for health.
Yeah.
Remember, because
health.
he was not responsive and agile enough to respond to the situation. He wanted to do business as usual. And he responded in such a remarkable way to dismiss him. Because he was given specific instructions which he did not comply with.
Yes.
You see?
From the commander-in-chief.
That's why it was a time of hard decision-making. And it was the time when I saw the disappointment in how he's disappointed by certain things that happened. And that is when we were facing the most difficult financial times. And opposition, before I proceed there, let me first start to say that in that 2020 budget, there was a 5% increment or an increment meant for councillors. And then suddenly, they are demanding their increment. When budget has been set aside for everything, opposition members and our BDP councillors, that they want their increment. You know, it was, I saw the restraint, how he managed to restrain himself to react when people are behaving like that. I just looked at him, the way he was minimizing, euphemizing his words to express his disappointment. And I was just trying to say, you know, if it was me, you know.
No doubt.
That's why I'm saying it was a test for true leadership. Now,
no, I want to get into honor. If the people give him another 5 years, where do you think?
Let me just finish to say that despite now that was a big challenge that he had faced.
Yes, ma'am.
And you must remember now that he still had to deliver, and there were so many things that he had delivered on.
Yes, ma'am.
100,000 plots.
Yeah.
That he had promised. He still delivered on those 100,000 residential plots. He still delivered.
Yes, ma'am.
What about the water project?
Yeah.
There was a serious in many major villages. Even in Gaborone, we had challenges of water.
Molopol.
In Gaborone, in my constituency, if it were not for the Masama 100 kilometer, we would still be suffering. But I'm telling you how he delivered on just, you know, those water projects.
Yes, ma'am.
There are so many things that he came up with, a developer manager project, you know, to ensure that the budgets are used properly and to ensure that contractors are accountable, you know, for government money. And so many projects are under that development, which currently, as we are speaking, as they are being implemented, the whole of Botswana is a construction site.
Yeah.
So I can tell you that he has achieved so much despite, you know, that challenge that he has achieved. But because he's a visionary leader, going into the a new term,
yes, ma'am,
which it's my biggest wish that Batswana would give him that a second term,
yes,
to continue to serve, you know, to deliver on his vision and his promises to Batswana. We now have a new 2024 manifesto, which is really taking the country in a new direction. Where we built in the past, we have developed this country, you know, using, you know, to develop the country through infrastructural development, or to expand and grow the economy through investment in infrastructural development. Yes, ma'am. But now he's steering us in a new direction, you know, a private sector export-led economy. That is what, you know, he's talking about value chain development, you know.
Awesome
That is what we are talking about. He's talking about digitization. That is, we are now saying, let this economy be a private sector-led economy. And you can see that he has established a new Ministry of Entrepreneurship.
Yes, ma'am.
We are ensuring that each and every ministry has a ease of doing business, you know, agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
The transformation agenda. Every ministry has a responsibility for ensuring that we comply, you know, with the transformation agenda.
Yes, ma'am.
So I would say that he's on the right track, and I'm aligned with his vision.
Awesome stuff. No, I really, really appreciate that. And I think my last question really will be on your hopes. Do you know who your contestants, your contenders are in Gaborone North right now?
Gaborone Bonington.
Gaborone Bonington North. Like,
Yes.
do you know who they are? Have they got the list yet? Like, you know, who are your opponents? I saw at the Red Poloko. And then the Red Dumaboko, is he standing? Because there's an article here, 2022.
You mean the primary election contenders?
The election contenders, yes, ma'am.
Yes.
He's one of them as well.
Yes.
How confident are you, though? Are you ready?
Yeah, I had 3 contenders.
Yep.
One is Poloko Pitwane, one is Mokghethi Malesu, and the other one was Rose Rantsiman. And Poloko Pitwane and Rose Rantsiman are really rallying behind me and being very supportive. They have brought, you know, their people to come on board, you know, and to integrate with the campaign team so that we can have one united campaign, you know. So the person who unfortunately did not support me is Mokghethi Malesu, who has gone ahead to join the BPF.
Hey.
And now he's one of the contenders in the general elections.
Oh.
Yes, so that is how I put it. I would say that I'm very fortunate that those who have decided to support me are supporting me.
So I always wonder, like Buladiso is one of the most interesting things ever. It's like, it takes a certain type of person to like feel, well, okay, cool, I may have lost here, but for the benefit of the whole team, I can go on and support it. I don't know, like, is this something that you guys talk about beforehand, or, you know, no matter what happens, we're still together? Or is it, it's up to you, man, it's your money, it's your energy, so you can go if you want?
Unfortunately, we don't talk about these things beforehand.
I think you guys should get counseling before this thing happens, because
no, that's true. Unfortunate. That is the unfortunate part. We don't get prior counseling. But sometimes when things pan out the way they pan out, then that's when the issue of getting counseling, you know, comes into play. But I was saying to them, some things, you know, sometimes just because you are a winner, you know, the so-called winner doesn't entitle you to be triumphant, you know. Because at the end of the day, you must know that you need the support of the people who were opposing you. If you can understand it in the context of how democracy works in a way that, you know, I've got a right to stand, you know, I've got a right to participate in this process. But one of the important things about democracy is also accepting the outcome of the democratic process. But it appears that sometimes it's difficult for people to accept that aspect.
Easier said than done.
That other aspect of democracy, accepting the outcome. So it seems like one of the contenders who have mentioned, he did not understand that aspect, that when you participate, you know, in a contest, you must know that there's a winner and there's a loser.
There's a loser.
You see, in any contest. But as I said the other day in one of our meetings, it was really a meeting of reconciliation, you know, with those people who I was contending with. And I said, because we need each other. There's a Setswana saying that says, "O se tshege o reletseng, mara ledi a sale pele." That is what the Setswana is saying. Because in order for you to be successful ahead, in the road ahead, you need those people.
Definitely.
Because le bana ba motho, you know. So
Awesome
that is what I believe in.
Okay, tumela mo go maswe. Mokghethi for coming through. I know we didn't have air conditioning. It was hot, but we had ice cream, so maybe that was a good balance. And we wish you all the best. And we're very, very happy you came through and shared your words with us. I don't know if you have any last words for Batubaka ko Gaborone Bonington North.
I would just like to, first of all, thank you for inviting me to your famous podcast. I've heard about it, Scar, and I've heard good things about it.
Thank you so
and
much,
I've been so fortunate to appear on this podcast today.
Thank you so much,
My message to Batuba Gaborone Bonington North is give me another term. Normally, an MP has 5 years. Unfortunately for me, I've not had 5 years. I've only had 3 years.
Yeah.
Give me another opportunity to do better, and I believe I can do better. I have gone through a learning curve in the past few years, and through that learning curve, I believe I can now serve them better as an MP. Ke kopa tlhopho ya batho ba Gaborone Bonington North.
Definitely. You guys heard her.
Ntlhophe ke le ntlhopheng wa parliament. Ebe le ntlhophela le makhanselara a me a supa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And guys, that's how we get to the end of our conversation with Mokghethi. Yo, guys, make sure that you go out there and vote. Whoever you want to vote for as well, you know. But yo, make sure that you do vote because and expect things to happen when also. And with that said, next up, we're getting healthy on the PODI-CAST. Keep it locked.
Different identities. Podcast with PODI-CAST.
Welcome back, guys. You're still on the PODI-CAST, and yeah, man, big up to our Honorable Mayor Anna Mokghethi for hanging out with us. I hope you really, really enjoyed it as much as we do. But back again, we're getting healthy on the PODI-CAST, and we got a new face in the house, so she's also going to be part of the team going forward. And she goes by none other than Dr. Rutendo Rukara. And yeah, she's going to be talking to us a little bit about arthritis today. But before we even get into all of the heavy stuff, hello.
Hi.
And welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we look forward to discussing all of these things with you because, like, we're trying to stay alive longer. And some of these things, like, we only hear about them when you talk to older people. Like, when we talk about arthritis all the time, my grandma pops in my head, you know what I mean? But I think just, you know, to get into it without wasting any time, can you start off by giving us a basic understanding of what your arthritis is and, like, the different types that exist?
Okay, so maybe by first squashing the myth, arthritis doesn't only affect older people.
Yeah.
It can affect a range of patients, including from children all the way to adults. So arthritis basically means when you've got any pain and swelling in your joint. So a joint is where any two bones meet in your body.
Yeah.
So it can affect any joint in your body. So if you've got any inflammation, pain, and swelling in the joint, that's by definition what we call arthritis. Most patients don't have arthritis if they've just got joint pains. So it's very important to differentiate because when you just have pain without associated swelling and inflammation, we call that arthralgias. Okay. So a doctor should be able to assess and identify whether there's actually arthritis versus arthralgia.
I suffer from gout. How do you know the difference?
So,
because these are all joint pains.
Yes.
Yeah. So how well, sometimes it's muscular pains, but, like, you know, without having people self-diagnose, how can you tell the difference when you're by yourself? Or this might be this and this might be that. So
there's certain clinical features that define arthritis. So there's certain things like I mentioned, the swelling. Yeah. So if your joint is swollen, if it's stiff, if there's redness associated, though rarely, but typically with gout, you will get change in skin color. Yeah. If there's pain, so pain associated with it, and loss of function. So you find that a patient with arthralgia won't want to move the affected joint because of the pain that comes about with it.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the arthritis, there's different conditions, almost up to 100 different conditions that can result in arthritis. So which is why it's important when you've got joint pains to actually have a diagnosis, because it's a broad term. So it's an umbrella term, but it can be caused by gout, or it can be caused by other diseases. Commonly, typically, what we call osteoarthritis, which usually happens in the elderly. And then we've got other diseases which I manage, called rheumatic or connective tissue diseases, where a patient then presents with different arthritis, and depending on the cause, the management is totally different. That's why it's important to know what is causing your arthritis.
I think that's where I want to go to. I want to go to the causes, because growing up, I'm trying to dispel some of the myths as well. When you do this to your joints, like when you break your knuckles and stuff like that, some people used to say that the little remnants that when the bones are knocking on each other, and that little stuff, ultimately arthritis pops up. What are some of the causes, and is that even a cause?
So I know that our parents used to tell us that to stop it.
Yeah.
There hasn't been any link towards popping your joints and actually resulting in arthritis, though if you're causing any damage. So if you've got damage that happens between your joints, that can predispose you to then developing osteoarthritis earlier. So it's always important to keep your joints safe, and if you can avoid the popping, then you should go ahead and do that. So in terms of causes, like I said, there's 100 types of causes for arthritis, but commonly things that we find, especially in our setting in Botswana, in the male population, one of the commonest is gout. And because gout has its own risk factors, especially it's more common in males, the older you get, the more chances associated with alcohol use and misuse. Red meat consumption, especially in Botswana, so you find red meat, and not just
all of them.
not just the meat.
I mean, even everyone in the room is looking at you like, what are we supposed to do?
So not just the meat, but the innards. So your sirobes and liver and everything, those are high risk. So what basically happens is your uric acid, which is a chemical in your body, becomes excess, and then it crystallizes in your joints. But unfortunately, it's not everyone who develop gout. You'll have to have other factors that then bring everything together, and then you get your gout attack.
Wow. Yeah. So how do you manage this? I mean, there's so many of them. And like you say, the first thing is really to get yourself diagnosed, get to a health practitioner. But like, how are you able, is it manageable?
So depending on the cause. There's some causes of arthritis that once you treat, it goes away. So for example, what we call septic arthritis, when you actually have an infection that has gone into your joint, though it is an emergency, so you treat that with antibiotics and treat the infection, it clears. But the majority of the causes of arthritis, they are chronic diseases. Chronic means that you can't treat, but you can't cure, but you manage the disease and treat it accordingly. So depending on the cause, the treatment is tailored based on that. And that's why it's important to see a health practitioner who's well-versed in the treatment and diagnosis, because you're not going to put an umbrella treatment for all joint pains or arthritis. Then that's where us as rheumatologists come into play. So
what are the misconceptions that are out there about arthritis?
I think the commonest are, one, it's for the elderly. Two is that especially when dealing with gout, because it comes on and off, most people think it's not a chronic disease and only treat the acute disease.
The cocktail.
Yes, especially the gout cocktail. I was saying the other day to the pharmacist, if there was a law to ban those, because what actually happens is, because patients go and get the gout cocktail, they actually don't get managed appropriately. So like gout, once you're having many frequent attacks, you need to be on chronic medication to actually prevent the attacks. And there's other implications of gout, not just on your joint, because most of the time these diseases are systemic, meaning they affect the whole body. So people with gout have a higher risk of cardiovascular disease. So your gout can make you have a higher risk of having a heart attack and a stroke in future. So all those intricacies need to be managed by a doctor who knows how to manage the disease.
Hey man, things just got real here. It's all too personal. Like, it's like you're talking directly to my soul. Are there any research items that you know about, advancements in arthritis research and treatment that you are excited about? Like, are we seeing a cure popping up sometime soon, or we're just going to have to manage?
In the field of rheumatology, there's always research that goes into improving the outcome for patients, because basically what we want to avoid as doctors is what we call damage. Because with arthritis, if it's not managed well, that's when you start seeing patients with hands that are deformed, with joints or knees that have now needing surgery. So our job is to actually prevent the damage from happening, because then that's not reversible. So there's lots of drugs that are in the pipeline or that have been created, like depending on the disease. Like I said, if it's gout, there's now new therapies that are being produced that can actually dissolve the crystals and the tophi, and we've seen a benefit in patients. Things like rheumatoid arthritis, which is also a common form of arthritis, where your body actually attacks its joints. So you actually need to put patients on drugs that we call immunosuppressives, where they make the immune system relax so that it stops attacking the joints. So lots of development and research actually goes into managing joints, and especially osteoarthritis, because currently we don't have any specific drug to treat the osteoarthritis. So research is ongoing, because now we manage the patients with medications just like painkillers, weight loss, and other things that are assistive, but nothing that really targets the disease and how it produces. So lots of research is in the pipeline. Yes.
No doubt. Tell me when you guys get a breakthrough. I want to talk a little bit also about mental health, because I know when I have those attacks and stuff, like I really don't want to drive anywhere. I don't want to talk to anyone, because I'm in pain.
Yeah.
And how important is it to like also, I guess, talk to the mental health in these situations? Because, you look normal one day and then the next day you're in all kinds of pain. So do you guys go for that? Do you advise someone to go to a doctor who actually teaches or actually helps with the mental health aspect of chronic diseases?
I think that's a very important question, Scar, because I think as healthcare workers, some of us actually don't holistically approach our patients, because with most patients with arthritis, it's a chronic disease, like I mentioned. So these patients are in chronic pain. So imagine that every day, every movement you make, you become aware of it. Whether you want to wash, clothes, do your dishes, dress up, bath yourself, you actually have to think about this. So because of this, depression and anxiety is closely related. We actually call them comorbidities. So they are closely related to most patients with these chronic arthritis conditions because of the chronic pain they undergo. So it's important to identify and ask the patient how the disease has affected their quality of life, if they're having any depressive or anxiety symptoms, and address them accordingly, whether it's going to be psychotherapy, send them to a psychologist for support and how to deal with this, or even sometimes we have to put them on medication to actually help to manage the depression and anxiety. So lots of mental health is associated with the diseases here.
Yeah, no, I've realized that. Like, I'll get mad at my nephew for even touching anywhere close to my foot. But, what advice would you give to someone? I mean, in closing, advice would you give to someone who's been newly diagnosed with arthritis?
So I think the biggest advice is early diagnosis equals better outcomes. So it's not an issue of trying to wish things away at home. Go and see a doctor who's well versed in management of arthritis, so that you are put on treatment early enough to prevent the damage that is associated with the disease. And I think another important thing would be that these diseases are usually systemic. So it's not just the joints you need to worry about. There are other organs that can be involved. For example, your lungs, your heart can be involved because of the disease as well, depending on which one we're dealing with. So it's important to be adequately, properly managed by a competent physician.
Awesome stuff, Dr. Rukarwa. Thank you so much. Looking forward to having more conversations with you. And remember, like we said, you can check her out at the RumaMed Medical Practices. And are they in Gabs, I guess?
Yes, we're by MRI House in Block 7.
Oh, Kakwa.
Yes.
Well, you're going to see me. I'm coming through to get myself checked out for this arthritis stuff, because we can't be playing games like this, guys. The cocktail is apparently not a good thing. I haven't found out how they do it. Anyway, guys, that's the end of our show. Thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll check you guys again next week, Wednesday. And hope you have a great week. Peace.
People of different identities. Podcast with PODI-CAST.